Welcome to Mormon Book Reviews, where an evangelical encounters the restoration. I'm your host, Stephen Pynakker, and I just have this great guest that's agreed to come on at the last minute today. Um, this is somebody who I'm really excited about because this is part of my new series that I'm doing during the summer on Thursdays, where I do what I call up and coming Thursdays, up and comers Thursdays. And I want to introduce new podcasts or YouTubers or people that are going to be influencers within Mormonism or important scholars in the future. And one of those people, and I heard so much about him from my buds at the Outer Brightness podcast. They said, you got to get Jaxon on, get Jaxon on. So I knew about you before I even met you at the Mormon History
Mhm.
Association. Jaxon, welcome to the program.
Hi, great to be here. Thank you so much, Steve.
So I just want to give a little introduction on Jaxon, and we're just going to have a very interesting conversation because Jaxon is going to be somebody that's going to be a household name in the scholarly community and perhaps in Mormondom as well in a few years. So we'll talk a little more about that. But here's the introduction. Jaxon has a bachelor's of arts degree in religious study and history from Arizona State University, graduating summa cum laude with honors. This fall, he will be attending Harvard Divinity School to begin his Master's of Theological Studies program, focusing in the history of Christianity. And your interests are Mormon studies, Armenian studies, we'll maybe get to that, biblical studies, Christian history, and theology. Uh, I'm so excited to have you on. And one of the reasons I wanted to have you on is because you are going to be, I think, the next generation of top notch apologists for the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter day Saints. And I think you have a very interesting message to say. And I want to start in an area that I think we can find some convergence with
Mhm.
my worldview and your worldview, which is that you've taken a great interest in grace and in the Book of Mormon. Now, before we talk about that, I think it's so cool because you have a background not only as a Latter day Saint, but also within the evangelical world. Tell us a
Mhm.
little bit about that.
Yeah. So essentially, I was raised in a fully Latter-day Saint household. Both parents came from several generations of faithful Latter-day Saints. And when I was 12 years old, my mother converted out of Mormonism and became a non-denominational Christian. She remained a non-denominational Christian from most of my high school experience. She'd probably identify as more secular or non-religious now. But during my early teenage and high school years, I was actively attending both faith communities. I would go to my father's LDS ward on Sunday, and I would go as well to my mom's non-denominational church. And during the week, I would go to small group Bible studies on Tuesday and Mormon Boy Scouts on Wednesday and summer camps for both. So early on, at a very formative age, I had this really kind of unique exposure to a whole different faith tradition. And while that was interesting to figure out personally and navigate both as a family and for myself, I'm very grateful for that kind of like early interfaith exposure and upbringing because I completely think that it's influenced so much of who I am today.
Hmm. And you were exposed to some different ideas that you wouldn't have normally learned at a standard ward house in your tradition, because you started hearing about the concept of grace within a Protestant context. And what was your
Yeah.
reaction to that?
Yeah, I had encountered or heard grace mentioned in various contexts within Mormonism growing up. But one thing that was really valuable with my mom's church is that grace, specifically the grace of Jesus Christ and within His atonement, was so central to essentially every sermon and lesson and discussion that we had. It was very much front and center, and at least compared to my early upbringing, that was a bit of a contrast to my Latter Day Saint experience. Now, I've also witnessed Latter Day Saints since that time collectively focus a lot more on grace and speak about it a lot more, and so I very much feel that I've been able to witness through the course of my own life some uh, significant shifts to focus in more in that direction and have more robust conversations about what grace is within a Latter-day Saint context. But it was at my mom's church that, in my opinion, I really first encountered Christ's grace in a personal experiential sense, right? It wasn't just a term I was hearing; it was something that I experienced and became deeply important to me.
Um, that's very interesting. And so, would you have said you possibly had what could be considered a born again experience within that context, or?
With some of the different summer camps I went to at my mom's church, I would probably say so. I think that can mean different things to different people, but in terms of really feeling not just convicted of my personal sin, but also feeling the need to be fully dependent on a redeeming Savior. That's something that moved more from something in the abstract to something that was real and personal to me. And it was my mom's church was a major catalyst for that taking place.
So, um, you you have chosen to stay within the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter Day Saints,
Hmm.
and you have taken some of what you have learned over into your faith community. Now, it
Hmm.
is interesting because over the course of the last few decades, we have seen a movement with many apologetics and within apologists within Mormonism that are moving in a grace direction. And
Hmm.
that's definitely, now I often think of that poor BYU professor who talked about having a personal relationship with Jesus Christ in the early 80s, and Bruce R. McConaughey just crushed the guy. I don't know
Right.
if you know that story, but
Eugene England. Yeah.
yeah. And that I've devastated the person. And just to see that that was pretty much the standard position that people took then. And now we're seeing over the course of the last few decades a move towards grace, which I think is
Yeah.
important, very
Yeah.
important.
Yeah. And specifically when it comes to Bruce R. McConkie and earlier iterations of the Latter Day Saint tradition, I do feel like some of that did come from almost like a reactionary movement against kind of evangelical Christianity within America. So at the same time, where you have individuals like Billy Graham becoming incredibly prominent, Latter Day Saints might feel like the messages of grace that they are either interpreting or hearing from various Christians. It feels. I don't mean this in a mean sense, but like cheap, right? Like, and for me, hearing Latter Day Saints sometimes describe like Christian beliefs about grace, sometimes there's caricatures there, right? This depiction of certain Christians believing that once you're saved by grace, you can sin as much as you want, or something like that, right? Yeah, I mean, there's some misunderstanding there, but I was very grateful to be able to be in those spaces and come to like a more accurate understanding.
I'm just really curious, where do you think the cross will ever play a role in your church?
I think it did once upon a time, historically speaking, and I think the reason it fell out of prominence and almost, took on this almost social or cultural taboo was because of sentiments of anti-Catholicism that crept into the faith in the early 20th century. Before that, you had various maybe editions of LDS scripture that were printed with crosses on them. You had at least one Mormon prophet buried with like a cross decorating his coffin. I think that was Joseph F. Smith. It was one of the Joseph Smiths, right? Yeah, it used to be that taboo didn't always exist, right? And so that's something as well that I'm seeing within LDS circles, some serious introspection about like why is it that we've had this kind of cultural reservation about the cross. And once you get into the history, once you start breaking these things down, I've encountered a number of Latter Day Saints recently who are not just like friendly towards the cross, but actively want to incorporate it into their sense of religious identity or maybe iconography, like in their house or something like that.
Yeah, yeah. Bruce Van Orman and I had a similar conversation about that, and I told him like you'd look at these old photographs of some of Brigham Young's wives, and they were wearing crosses, and
Yeah.
so
Yep. Mhm.
the cross has been there all along. I'd like to see them move towards that. I think I'm partly because I'm thinking, I want to bring build bridges and reconciliation between our camps. And I'm just trying to think of different ways we can work this out.
Yeah.
Um, a couple of things I sometimes there are a couple doctrinal differences that we
Mhm.
do have, and I was talking to some evangelicals the other day, and I said, if the LDS could make exaltation more like the Greek, more like the Eastern Orthodox view of apotheosis,
Mhm.
and if they can say that Heavenly Mother is Mary, then we maybe have a way of getting you guys somehow in within Christianity. What do you think of those two propositions?
Yeah, well, there have been various comparisons between like Roman Catholicism or Eastern Orthodoxy on both those two counts when it comes to Mormonism. Of course, there's significant differences there as well. The Mormon concept of exaltation assumes that God and humanity are ontologically of the same kind, whereas in more of an either a Roman Catholic or Eastern Orthodox, or I guess you could just say like historical Christian concept of it. That creature creator dichotomy is still in existence, but individuals are able to more closely and fully participate in God's energies or God's grace, right? There'd be some kind of foundational theological points that would need to shift there. And then when it comes to Mary, I mean that would be really interesting. I've had some dialogues with Catholics about that, and I mean, uh, yeah, that would be there would be some other things that would need to shift in Latter-day Saint thought for that to happen too, right? This concept of Heavenly Mother is very much often tied with the notion of right exaltation, meaning that individuals can become gods or goddesses, and there's usually like procreative elements to the belief of Heavenly Mother as well. So yeah, those factors would probably need to be sorted out too. But I yeah yeah, it's always interesting to play out those hypotheticals, right?
Yeah, it always is. And I one of the things that I try to do was when I because we talk about like the creature creator dichotomy and
Mhm.
everything like that. I often say, when you look at somebody across the street who's protesting against you, no matter what side you're on, just remind yourself that they are a fellow image bearer.
Mhm.
I think
Yeah.
it's important that we just look at all of us brothers and sisters of humanity, are fellow image bearers.
Yeah. Mhm. Yeah.
And I think that if we can adopt that idea, then I think we have a better way of looking at it. And there is a divine spark within all of us. There's no question about that as well.
Yeah, I actually saw a quote the other day that I really liked that essentially said, your love of God is only equal to the love that you have for the person you love the least."
Hmm, good one. Good
And
one.
that one definitely stuck with me.
So, there's always going to be, obviously, we're never going to be 100% in line with each other, but I think that it's important that we find these areas where we can find the commonality, but also acknowledge the fact that there are going to be areas that we're not going to find the common ground.
Of course. Hmm.
Um, and so, speaking of not finding common ground, uh, I was enjoying 18-year-old version of Jaxon um taking on a couple Calvinists on the street in Arizona on YouTube. And one mostly was James White, but also Jeff Durbin stepped in a little bit there too. Tell me a little bit about that experience.
Yeah. So because I've lived in Arizona all my life, I've been able, as soon as I was like really interested in studying religions and visiting different places of worship, that's what I've done in like the larger Phoenix metro area. And one of those churches that I encountered early on YouTube, due to their kind of impressive social media presence, was Apologia Church, which at the time, Jeff Durbin, Pastor Jeff Durbin, was the basically main pastor for that church, with his mentor, kind of personal mentor, being Reverend or Pastor James White. And since then, James White has also become a pastor of Apologia. But I had the opportunity to visit Apologia on probably like 3 or 4 different occasions. I was able to talk to different folks from Apologia that proselyte or engage in outreach ministry at like the Mesa Temple during the Easter pageant or the Christmas lights. And so because of that, I don't know, like I'm always drawn to dialogue. I'm interested in dialogue, and Apologia comes from the Reformed tradition. So they are Calvinist, and there's a number of other kind of aspects of their kind of collective identity that are interesting in terms of like apologetics. They are presuppositionalists in terms of their view of law and government. They espouse theonomy or dominionism or Christian Reconstructionism. I'm still reading up on those terms, so I'm sure that there's some nuances or technical distinctions between the three, but definitely in terms of theonomy, they are theonomic. And yeah, it's a really interesting faith group. I became like just sincerely interested in them once I started talking to them and visiting their church. So yeah, that curiosity and those dialogues, these points of difference, right, as we would hash them out, despite my best efforts to keep those civil or just like more friendly, there was kind of a point in which they crossed over into being interpreted as like I am no longer sincerely open to the gospel of Jesus Christ, and that at least in the words of Jeff Durbin, that he had a New Testament imperative to keep me out of his congregation, or that he viewed me as a wolf in sheep's clothing, basically, right? And so I've technically been barred or like prohibited from revisiting or stepping foot in Apologia. I was very specifically told that unless like I experience like a personal conversion, that I'm not permitted to come back. And so yeah, I mean that was interesting because that's the first and only church that I've ever been actually banned from. But I do want to point out that I do have ties to various members of Apologia still. I just went out to lunch with a good friend of mine who is a convert to Apologia, or to Reformed Christianity out of Mormonism. He's a former Latter-day Saint, very nice guy, lives close to me, and we had great conversations. So I don't know, these things happen. And at least with respect to the exchange that's on YouTube, there's kind of like this kind of informal debate that I'm having with James White on the street outside the Mesa Temple. And the footage that's available only captured probably like a third of our total conversation. So we were talking about a number of things earlier that dealt with other subjects in kind of Mormon Christian apologetics. But yeah, so that's free to watch. If people are interested, I think the title is like "Young Mormon Speaks to a Calvinist" or something like that.
Yeah, I'll post a link in the description.
Yeah. But yeah, I mean, it's very interesting. I haven't focused as much specifically on Apologia, like since we've kind of like had a parting of ways. But I remain really interested in Reformed Christianity and presuppositionalism and theonomy.
So I'm from, actually, my family on both sides is from a Dutch Reformed background, a
Yeah.
Christian Reformed church, which is based out in Grand Rapids, Michigan. And so we have a real connection to that. So I could say that I was definitely what you could call, as a kid, I would call myself a charismatic Calvinist.
Mm-hmm.
I like to tell as a joke, I like to tell my Calvinist friends, I used to be a Calvinist and then I found Jesus. And but also I will say that even though I no longer am a Calvinist, I still think like one.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm still highly analytical, but I just learned that when I was watching the 18-year-old Jaxon taking on these guys, I thought, first of all, you acquitted yourself quite well.
Oh, thank you, appreciate it.
And I thought that there are a few times where you're kind of questioning a few things where you're basically saying, yeah, but doesn't God have to move on me? You're putting everything on me that I'm going to be responsible, but yet it's God that makes that decision, not me.
Yeah. Yeah, the kind of the crux of the conversation that's available between myself and James White is him essentially telling me that I need to repent and believe, which is something that he believes that is clearly part of his outreach responsibilities as a pastor. And myself saying that okay, well, according to Reformed theology or um, monergism, that it's not possible outside of God's decree or God's call for me to repent and believe in an efficacious manner. And so, like, my point was essentially like, if we accept the tenets of Reformed theology, like, yes, you can still tell me to repent and believe, but I can't actually help but be a Mormon or be outside of saving faith according to your theology.
Yeah, it's when I was watching it, and I've watched James White and Durbin for years,
Mhm.
and I think, oh, I used to be just like these guys. I was just, and this is the thing that people need to understand is that a lot of Calvinists like to go after charismatics because they say, well, they're when they see us rolling around and raising hands or whatever, they say, well, they're just operating. That's the flesh. That's the flesh. They're
Yeah.
just showing off or whatever. I remind them, so up here, the brain, this is also the flesh.
Hmm.
And I think that the appeal of Calvinism is that it does appeal to the flesh that of your brain, your mind, your thoughts. In other words, they are thinking that they can stand back and think and judge other people, and they don't realize that that's the flesh operating as well, and that the spirit can be subjective, that our faith can be subjective, and there's no room for nuance or subjectivity at all within that worldview.
Yeah, yeah, I've had a range of different experiences with Calvinists, ranging from those that are more quote unquote cage stage Calvinists, that frankly aren't the most pleasant to interact with, to those that I have like very good relationships with and that I feel very valued as an individual, right? And so it's interesting, of course, like seeing that diversity within a faith community that originally, when my exposure was limited to just apologia, my perceptions of Calvinists were very much like not positive, let's say, right? And so I'm pleased that I've been able to kind of expand that out quite a bit.
And I have much of my family would be considered Reformed or Calvinist in some regard, so I
Yeah,
can speak too. Yeah, they're not all bad. I'm just talking about those guys in
of
particular.
course.
Well, of course, Jeff Durbin says that you're persona non grata and the child of wrath. I'd
Yeah.
like to. Where's the fruit of the spirit there? Where's grace? Where's love?
Well, yeah, I don't know. It's I'm kind of baffled by how things went down as well. One thing that was really interesting is that when I so these conversations or exchanges happened right before I departed for my mission in 2018. And so I reached out to a number of people before my mission, both of my faith and not of my faith, asking if they'd want to receive my emails or get updates or whatever. Um, Reached out to Jeff Durbin and some other folks at Apologia, that are more like elders or right, in various like ecclesiastical positions, and the reception there was not positive. Essentially, I was told in no uncertain terms that I was departing for quote unquote an eternal murder campaign, because of how they perceive Mormon missions. But what was interesting, of course, is that my mission, I served in Armenia, and I'm not sure. I'm actually kind of certain that Armenian Christians, which are vastly predominantly of the Armenian Apostolic Church, which is part of Oriental Christianity or Oriental Orthodox Christianity. I'm not sure that that would fall within the acceptable range of saving Christian faith, given that often Roman Catholics and others are excluded from that as well, from the uh, at least the perspective of many folks at Apologia.
Yeah, that's a good point. In other words, what difference would it make if they went from one untrue church to another, right?
Right, right. Yeah.
So you have a really interesting blog called the Apotheosis Narrative, and
Hmm.
has some really good stuff in there. And one of the articles I looked at was the Calvinism Conundrum. So talk a
Mhm.
little bit about, well, we did talk a little bit about that, but I want to highlight that you need to read that article, The Calvinism Conundrum, and it also includes the video that we are
Mhm.
talking about. Anything else you want to add to your Calvinistic thing?
Well, just basically, the major point of that article in particular, I do talk about the experience. I provide some commentary from other Christians who are either Armenian or Provisionist, not Armenian with an E, but Armenian. Talking about how, at least from their perspective, here was a Mormon kind of showing the futility of Calvinism when it comes to outreach situations. Because I have like a whole kind of logical, I don't know if you want to call it chart or list or something like that. But essentially, if the premises are true, and it's hard for me to logically not accept the given conclusion that I cannot help but to be unsaved at the current moment from the Calvinistic perspective.
Yeah, that's the conundrum, and it was a very well put article. You also included another evangelical, as I recall,
Mhm.
that gives a
Yeah.
refutation and does talk about how the futility of a Calvinist dealing with somebody outside of conventional Christianity. And just want to kind of touch base with a couple of things that you talk about also, and that is the gay and trans issues within your
Mhm.
church.
Yeah.
I know this has been a real difficult thing. You had the November policy in 2015, and then the rescinding it a few years later. It just seems like the church doesn't seem to be handling this whole issue very well to me.
Yeah, well, this is very much a struggle in a number of different faith traditions, right? There are many internal conversations taking place or tensions between those that in changing contemporary times where understandings or perceptions of gender or sexuality or how they intersect with morality or spirituality, right? You have camps which want to hold fast to kind of traditional understandings of sexuality and gender, as outlined by various like maybe sacred texts or within given traditions, and then others that want to find new ways to include and modify or expand their respective theologies to be, affirming and inclusive of those identities and experiences. And so, yeah, lots of tensions. Definitely, the LDS tradition is no exception to that. In fact, when it comes to American religion, the LDS Church is often highlighted along some of these, culture wars or battlegrounds of ideology and identity. More so once given the LDS Church's significant involvement in Proposition 8 in California, and the way that Latter day Saints in that area were very much mobilized to help prevent the legalization of same sex marriage in the state.
So this is obviously something, in the evangelical community, it's torn our community apart as well, and we have a very similar dynamic going on our side as well.
Mhm.
I think that the one thing I will say to all of you evangelicals out there, the way um, that gay and trans and LGBTQ people have been treated historically by the church has been awful, and
Mhm.
we're in great need of repentance for what we
Mhm.
have done. And I'm speaking as an evangelical for our movement, that we need to repent for the great sin that we committed against these people.
Mhm.
Um, what about women? Do you think that they'll ever get the priesthood in your church?
Yeah, of course, there's ongoing conversations about that. Personally, when it comes to, for instance, Joseph Smith's theology, what I see him doing, or what I see him as trying to do towards the latter end of his life, during the Nauvoo period, when he is, expanding and innovating with the temple endowment and with the respective theology and conceptions of priesthood and cosmology that come out of that. It's my view that he seemed to very much be setting up the Relief Society as kind of this equal hierarchy to that of the male priesthood in the church, and that the two were meant to complement one another. It was very much complementarian in that sense. and that the Relief Society was meant to have significant privileges and powers in the church. Within the temple, of course, also introduced in this time is this concept of both men and women becoming priests and priestesses unto God, or later with the belief in exaltation, gods and goddesses. And so, I think there's been some interesting shifts in recent years. One of the most notable would probably be around 2013. Let's see. He might have been within the first presidency at the time. I'm pretty sure he was. Dallin H. Oaks gave a general conference talk where he essentially argued that women in the church who hold callings or different ecclesiastical responsibilities or whatnot, or serve as missionaries, function by means of the priesthood, that the power and authority by which they do their work is by the priesthood. So there are some things that would have to shift there. I think there's this internal debate about whether or not priesthood, whether or not there should be different gender roles in the church that impact ecclesiastical offices, or whether anyone from any gender background should be able to hypothetically occupy any space in the church. So it kind of comes down to some of the tensions between let's say third and fourth wave feminism, right?
Good point. Yeah, it's interesting because I've heard some people have speculated that the priesthood keys were conferred to the Relief Society by Joseph. And also, when you were talking about independence, if you look at some Relief Society publications, some of their stuff in the 1930s, they were writing stuff that they couldn't get away with writing today.
Yeah, in a number of different ways. We're also seeing this kind of groundswell resurgence of women in the church who are trying to make their voices more prominent by various means. There's a number of different pushes, right? One of the most notable would be that of the ordained women's movement, which is the most vocal about advocating on behalf of female ordination in the LDS tradition. But there's also plenty of other Latter-day Saint women who might not be going that far, but are still vying for more inclusion, more prominence, more authority or recognition, or things like that.
So in the 80s and 90s, some people were working in demographics were doing some long-term projections about the growth of the church, and some were saying that by the middle of this century that it would become a world religion. Now, over the course of the past 20 years, we haven't seen those numbers really come to pass. Some people say it's the internet, the people finding things out, people are leaving. So the church 20, 30 years ago thought it was on the cusp of becoming a big religion, and now it's kind of just a good sized Protestant denomination in the United States, right? In that context, what is now? You look for the next 20, 30 years. What does the church look like in 20 to 30 years? What do you see what's going to be developing?
Yeah, I mean, it just depends what part of the world that we're talking about, right? The trends that we're seeing in religion with respect to Western Europe or North America, things definitely are slowing in terms of religiosity or dropping even, right? The proportion of self-identified non-religious individuals is rising. And there's definitely many generational differences driving this as well. By and large, many traditions are having these similar struggles about retaining youth, about attracting new converts. And so comparatively speaking, I think the LDS church is still performing well in that regard. Growth is slowing and is slowed to one of the lowest points in church history. But it's still positive, right? It's not in the red. And there's other traditions that are, suffering greater losses of numbers. So when it comes to attracting new converts, where the LDS church is growing are in places like West Africa or other parts of Africa, Southeast Asia, parts of Latin America. There's still sizable numbers that are converting or joining the LDS Church there. But of course, retention is always an ongoing problem.
Yeah, and it's same here. We
Mhm.
got the basically same demographic situation happening as well.
Yeah.
Um, so you served a mission in Armenia,
Mhm.
and you're very interested in that topic, the people, the country. What got you interested in that?
Yeah, well, what I prior to my mission, prior to receiving my mission call, I was already interested in Eastern Christianity when it came to my kind of career path that I envisioned for myself. Just because I thought that it's a lot less oversaturated than maybe New Testament studies or something like that, and the academy can be a really difficult place in many respects. And so I don't know, I was just like really interested for those reasons. So when I did get my mission call to Armenia, I thought it was just absolutely heaven sent for a number of reasons. But that was definitely one of them. And as soon as I got to the country, or once I started really looking into the country and its rich history, I absolutely fell in love with it. So just briefly, Armenia was the first officially Christian country in the world. They became Christian in 301 AD, which is 24 years before the Council of Nicaea. They trace their Christian roots to the apostles Thaddeus and Bartholomew, and Christianity has been just an absolutely essential aspect of Armenian identity since then. And it's been something that has definitely helped them in the face of many challenges, probably most notably the 1915 Armenian genocide, which was perpetrated by the Ottoman Empire. Um, uh, their faith is what has largely helped them survive in many different respects. And so over there, it's just such a rich history. Here in my background, I have a church in Armenia, and I was able to just visit the coolest places, very rich, historical sites. There's churches that I stood in that date back to the 5th century. Yeah, and so it was just unparalleled in terms of what I had experienced prior. It felt like I was almost like walking around in something out of like Narnia or something like that, right? Like it had this very like medieval, ethereal, like uh, fantastic feel to it. So the people are just amazing, the most hospitable I've ever encountered. The culture, the history, the language, I just love it so much. So I'm looking forward to hopefully studying it more and contributing to scholarship on the subject and help building pathways of understanding between this part of the world and the kind of the global West, if you will.
And you've had interactions with the Armenian community in the
Mhm.
American
Many.
Southwest as well, right?
Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah, I've really gotten to know the Armenian community here in Arizona, and have been introduced to a number of individuals of Armenian descent.
And I know that around the early 19th century, there was a large group of Armenians that came to Los Angeles that were what you could almost call proto-Pentecostals.
Hmm.
And they actually played a major role in the Azusa Street revival
Hmm.
and bringing Pentecostalism here in the United States. What has been your interactions with Pentecostals in that context?
Yeah, so definitely like so once the Soviet Union fell, Armenia as a country began to open itself up to various outsiders or outside religious movements, and so you see Latter-day Saints, you see Jehovah's Witnesses, you see Pentecostals and Evangelicals enter into Armenia and really start to influence some of the Christianity there, or at least establish a presence there. And so when it comes to Pentecostalism in particular, I encountered different Pentecostals in Armenia. Now, mind you, probably like 98% of Armenia would identify as Armenian Apostolic, and so all of these groups would still be like significant religious minorities there. But when it came to Pentecostals, I often found that a number of them were almost like more receptive to converting to Mormonism because there was a number of important like social dynamics that could often keep Armenians from joining the LDS Church, because this sense of their Christian identity was so tied to their ethnic identity or sense of self. And so there's many Armenians that the thought of leaving the Armenian Apostolic Church, it was just really difficult for them, and understandably so. Now, for those that came from other traditions that had already, potentially left the Apostolic Church, it was sometimes easier for them to make that leap. And so I encountered various Armenians, both in terms of local leaders or members that still had this charismatic or Pentecostal flair to them. And just in terms of the gifts of the Spirit, or different charismatic events or phenomena, Armenian Latter-day Saints are very much prone to visions or dreams, or in some contexts, let's say speaking in tongues, or things like that. One branch president that I worked closely with in Armenia definitely came from a charismatic background, and I could tell that in his preaching style, in his the flavor of Latter-day Saint theology that he taught over the pulpit. So it was really interesting to see that, because I don't know, I was already kind of aware and had an understanding of Pentecostalism before my mission. And so many of the other missionaries didn't really pick up on some of those subtle differences, but I thought they were fascinating.
My good friend Christopher Thomas wrote the book Pentecostal Reads the Book of Mormon,
Yeah.
and his basic says this is a Pentecostal book.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I can see how it could resonate.
Right.
Uh,
Right. Absolutely.
so it is true. I can see how that could definitely could. So I enjoyed our conversation that we had today, Jaxon. I want the interaction, the cross pollination. What you just described in Armenia would be a type of cross pollination, even.
For sure.
And but it's important that we build bridges and we knock down barriers between our communities and have conversations, have adult conversations about
Mhm.
our differences, acknowledge them, but also realize that there are some similarities that we can embrace and work in those areas as well. um, Jaxon, thanks so much for coming on today.
Yeah. Thank you, Steve. I really appreciate it.
So I just want you to like and subscribe, hit the notification bell so that you can be informed when the new video is going to be out. I'm going to provide a link to that cool video where he takes on the James White. I'm also going to send a link, post a link in the description as well to the Apotheosis narrative. It's a great blog. Check it out, and you all have a great day.